Right, good evening. Well, I'm Lee Harris, and today we have got an absolute bombshell of a discussion lined up with none other than Laurence Fox. Now, Elon Musk just called out Nigel Farage as unfit to lead Reform UK, while Farage distanced himself from Tommy Robinson, whom Musk supports. Is this the end of the Farage? Is this a new beginning for reform, or is this just an MSM distraction? Let's find out. Laurence, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. Let's get into it.
My pleasure. Lovely to see you, Lee.
Lovely to see you too. Right, first up. So, Elon, we've got to talk about this, haven't we? Because this has just been an absolute grenade lobbed at Nigel Farage by Elon Musk. So Elon has publicly called out Nigel Farage, saying he doesn't have what it takes to lead Reform UK. So what's your take on this?
I think it's a sort of strangely philosophical one, which is that what we've all lived under for the last several years has been a cancel culture and a suppression of free speech. And it's hurt so many people, high profile, no profile people, who've been cancelled, shut up, fired, lost their jobs. You know, I'm an example of it, just for pointing out their views. And I think in order to react to that, which is a major philosophical assault on free speech and stuff like that, the alternative needed to be anti-cancel culture and pro-free speech. And I don't think Nigel Farage has shown himself to be anything either of the two. And I would use a sort of strange analogy, and it's not, I'm not trying to disparage Jordan Peterson in this way at all, but in the same way as Jordan Peterson was absolutely bang on the money when it came to free speech, when he swerved off to talk about God, a few people were like, oh, hang on, I was used to you talking about free speech. And in the same way, so when Nigel has sort of remoulded himself or reinvented himself as a culture warrior, it's like, well, hang on a minute, you never spoke about the culture, you weren't interested in it. So he is a proponent of cancel culture, and he's not a free speech advocate either. And I think Elon, it's really strange. I'm trying to work out my role in all of this as well, because I spoke to Elon's dad the other day and said much the same thing. So, anyway, I think that I think it's the right thing to happen. I think in order for the opposition, for the resistance, which is coming, regardless of what anyone says, it is coming in whatever form, which is why I'm not disheartened by any of this stuff. It has to be based on the principles of free speech and anti-cancel culture, and neither of those things Nigel Farage, in my mind and in my view and my assessment, understands on even a cursory level, actually.
Well, let me give a slight comeback on that. I mean, I'm someone who deserted the Conservative Party after, frankly, they deserted me. You know, I was a paid-up member of the Conservatives. I am still utterly furious with being lied to for 14 years, especially about immigration. You know, when Boris Johnson, who's, you know, this is kind of a similar thing in some respects. I did idolise Boris Johnson a little bit, not as much anymore. I still respect the guy, but one thing I don't think I'll ever forgive him for is as soon as he sort of took office, after telling us that he would reduce immigration and put that into his manifesto, who's going to increase the skill level and lower the numbers. First thing he did when he got into office, I'm sure you're aware, is he did the exact opposite. He lowered the salary threshold and he just opened the floodgates. And what I'm getting at is, I think I represent a reasonable pool of people who are absolutely furious with the Conservatives and see reform as the vehicle, the only vehicle that we have to defeat the uni party, to really change politics fundamentally. So what do you say to people like me, or people who have a lot of respect for Nigel Farage? Now, I would just, on a side point, very quickly possibly argue that I think it's possibly a bit unfair to say that he's not being completely a culture warrior. I think Nigel Farage has put himself out over the years. I mean, especially thinking about the run up to the EU referendum campaign, where he was stood in front of that poster. What was it? I can't remember which poster it was. But
Yeah, the poster of all of the
yeah,
military-aged men in a big queue. Yeah, that
yeah.
one.
So the counterpoint that I would make to that is, I think you're partially right. I think this could potentially be a good thing, in as much as that reform aren't infallible, they should be criticised. But I think Nigel Farage has got the charisma and he has had the ability to talk about things. He's put his head above the parapet many a times in the past to his own detriment. I'm not saying he's the permanent solution to reform, but I think he's got a massive part to play. So what would you say to people who are of that view?
I think that it's a much. I've been saying for years that there's not a political solution to a cultural problem, and I come from an arts background, so I don't come from a political background. I'm not a weights and measures type of person, so I don't. I think about
We
things.
like you, Laurence.
Yeah, I think about things solely from a cultural perspective. So for me, the reason why I sort of piped up in the first place was because culture was suffering as a result of all of this terrible wokery that we were witnessing. And I think that Nigel is one of the bravest, most noble men in Britain, and by far the greatest politician Britain has seen in the last...
Most influential, without a doubt.
Yeah, certainly in the last 30, 40 years. So he's an incredible human being. I just think he took one step too many, in a way, which was to try. I don't, for example, agree with you that that poster was a culture war poster. I think that was the sort of poster that would have inflamed many people in a way which would be deemed to be racist. Now, I completely agree with that poster. We have unfettered immigration. It's got worse and worse and worse. But again, one has to sort of break it down as a philosophical idea, which is philosophically the Conservatives allowed immigration to be unfettered because they wanted to try and temporarily boost the GDP of this country because none of us are breeding. So you can see it, they do it just for cash. And it's different from Labour's desire for refugees welcome and all that rubbish that you see plastered all over everyone's sort of things with them sort of holding their hostage signs saying refugees welcome. That's an ideological position. They don't believe in nation states or borders.
Yeah.
And they would rather some unelected bureaucrat in Brussels told us what to do. So on that front, Nigel was incredible. He began it. He began the war, and he succeeded in securing the greatest political victory other than Trump 2016 that's been achieved. But he doesn't understand that what Britain is at war with is not the EU. We're at war at home now. Agreed. And the enemy is here. Now, Nigel was correct to say, look, we can't have all these people here. This is wrong. But, he didn't really make the cultural argument for that on anything other than a sort of very top-level, national identity argument.
He has been quite critical of Islam, to be fair.
The chairman of his party is a Mohammedan, so I don't know how critical in my mind he's utterly failed. I mean, other than the 2 points that I raised about the fact that he is pro-cancel culture and he doesn't support free speech, is that anyone who studies Islam. And I really, really advise people to do so. There are a lot of places where you can understand Islam. No one will respond to what the battle that Britain is facing, the battle for Britain, which is what's coming. You can't do that with a Muslim chairman. You just can't.
I agree with you. And to be fair, I think maybe I should have worded that slightly different. You've been very critical of Islamist extremism, and I've seen him.
What does that mean?
Well, for example, what I'm thinking of is where he was quoting those statistics from that poll that went out. I can't think it was the Henry Jackson Society, who did quite a shocking poll showing that 50% of the Muslim community in this country still support Hamas, and a lot of those were younger as well, not necessarily the older generation. And these are points that are quite controversial, and opening himself up to quite a big attack. Now, where I agree with you is that I think what specifically about this incident, what I've really been in deep thought about is could Nigel Farage have handled this different? And we'll talk about the elephant in the room, which shouldn't be the elephant in the room. It is Tommy Robinson. Now, this is where I think that I think our views align, in as much as that I think he's handled that pretty badly. What he could have or should have done, and this is why I don't really understand, because Nigel's not stupid. He's a political. I think it's fair to say he's politically very, very clever. Now, why he's dug in like this, rather than being pragmatic. So my view on Tommy Robinson is I think a lot of people share this view, is I don't necessarily allow what the media have told me about Tommy Robinson to allow me to form my opinion of him. In fact, I almost take a complete opposite view to whatever the MSN will pump out about him. And I take him for what I see. Now, in fact, I was at the rally where you spoke at. I went to the United Kingdom rally as an observer. I was there all day. I missed the actual march bit itself, but as soon as the march hit Trafalgar Square, I was there all day. And I formed my opinions by actually physically going to talk to people. And I couldn't have been surrounded by a nicer bunch of more welcoming people from all across the cultural and political spectrum in this country. And where I think Farage has made a mistake is if he'd have just said something. I think Maya Tusi said put a really good post out earlier. Tommy Robinson hasn't asked to join Reform. He hasn't put himself forward to want to be involved with Reform. Nigel Farage is obviously being asked these questions by a mainstream media who are jumping on this, knowing that it's a very difficult subject for him to talk about. Now, if he'd have just said something along the lines with praising Tommy Robinson where he should be praised for his talking up about grooming gangs way before it was popular to do so, and the way that he has been treated, in my view, very badly by our judicial system, you can make those arguments without saying, we love Tommy Robinson, we want him in the party, he wants to be part of this. I don't understand why he hasn't taken this more pragmatic view and why he's just dug his heels in and said, no, we don't want anything to do with him, and not thinking about the implications of that for his support base.
I agree with everything you just said. I think he misread the room, actually, which was that what people are fed up with, as I sort of take me back to what I was saying at the beginning, is people are fed up with cancel culture. They hate it.
Yeah.
And therefore, the alternative cannot involve cancel culture. Now, I have my own views as to why Nigel Farage wants to distance himself from Tommy Robinson. And I can understand why you would, because it's not politically shrewd to associate yourself with someone who's been so demonised.
The media are killing for it.
Yeah, I mean, before I was fired by GB News, I used to say, get Tommy Robinson on. You get a bunch of brown racist women on all the time. Why don't you get on? You keep saying that he's a racist. He's never said anything racist. Get him on.
I agree with you on that.
And so what Nigel could have done quite easily is just dodged the bullet and said, I believe in free speech. And I believe that Tommy Robinson has highlighted lots of things that are now coming to pass, which is what Tommy Robinson has done, which is why I'm an ardent supporter of Tommy Robinson. And again, you're right when you say Tommy Robinson's never asked to be associated with Reform or anything else. But in a world where, we have a dictatorial socialist government which erects kangaroo courts to lock people up for tweets, and free speech is at the forefront of everyone's mind, and it's the forefront of everyone's concerns about, especially their children, their ability to express themselves, to be able to work their way through situations by discussion. To instead of attacking Tommy Robinson, which is what Nigel Farage wants to do, because he wants to go, look, I'm not a racist. Essentially,
Has he gone out of his way to attack Tommy Robinson? Genuine question, because I haven't seen him actually.
Every single member of that
happened.
party has. Every single member other than Rupert Lowe has, yeah.
Well, I've seen him being prodded at by unfriendly media who are making hay out of this. I haven't necessarily seen him sort of come out and directly go, right, this is my view on Tommy Robinson.
He's cancelled him. That's
yeah, no, I agree with you on that.
That's what I'm trying to say. It's like,
yeah,
he's cancelled him. So I go, fuck you. I don't want to live in a world of cancelling. I don't want cancelling on the right or the left. I don't want cancelling full stop. And that's why I say that Nigel's he doesn't even get the top level of what the problem in this country is culturally, because he doesn't understand that we don't want to just replace left-wing cancel culture with right-wing cancel culture.
Agreed.
I don't want to get rid of the people that, ruined my life. I want them to speak more, and I want to speak back to them, because I think that's the way you do it. So what Nigel's done is essentially, what he's doing is he's saying, I want all of your... And Tommy, I've worked closely with Tommy on a lot of things, and Tommy's a big fan of Nigel and reform.
Yeah,
he's a very
at the Unite the Kingdom rally.
Very humble guy. You just don't attack him, don't cancel him.
Yeah,
because you're replacing. What are we getting? We're getting Nigel Farage dictatorship, which takes us into another problem with reform, which Ben Habib pointed out over and over and over again, which is, what if we don't want you to be in charge, Nigel? What if we want someone else to be in charge, like Rupert Lowe or Ben Habib or whoever? What about that? And then Zia Youssef says, we've got the best legal minds in Britain working on a constitution. No, he doesn't. Because I work with the best legal minds in Britain on a daily basis, because so many people try and destroy me on a daily basis. And what they put together as a constitution is bullshit. So it's like, you Tommy Robinson supporter, racist little Englanders, vote for me. But Tommy has nothing to do with me. And then what compounds it is that Tommy's not even asked to be part of reform. So Nigel's proven himself to be what I think is a very thin-skinned dictator who took one step too far into politics when he could have gone on GB News, got paid all of his money, and then gone and helped Trump in America, and it could have been fine. But he decided, I think vaingloriously, and I think absolutely as a result of the first United Kingdom rally, which we put together on June the 1st last year, he announced within 3 hours that he was taking over reform, because he saw the constituency, and he saw how many people there were out there that were sick and tired of it. But what he didn't do, as a very good friend of mine pointed out to me the other day, was he hadn't gone to the same church as us for long enough. He doesn't understand the cultural problem. He understands immigration is diluting our culture, but he doesn't understand that the problem is already here, and we've got to deal with a problem that's here, and that involves being bold. And we're going to see the rise, and I'm not wrong about this, because I'm just not. You're going to see the rise of an anti-Islamification party. That's what you're going to see. And reform won't do that. So reform are finished, as far as I'm concerned. They weren't really anywhere. I mean, they were 12% in the polls. Yes, people were annoyed, and it was getting built, but they weren't. Without Nigel, they weren't. Nigel doubled their star factor, and it's now been halved, because Elon Musk is not going to give him 100 million quid, and he's not going to give. And Reform is a small organisation without much money. I know they call them members, but they're not members. It's the smoke and mirrors of the whole thing that I find completely. I find it. I don't want to be angry on my own side, but I just find it detestable, actually, and vainglorious that someone would think that this is my final hurrah into politics. I can go and stand in the House of Commons and talk crap to people. It's like, no, that's not what people need. People need change.
Well, maybe think about it this way. I mean, I hopefully disagree with you on, in as much as I really do hope reform are not finished. And as you just said, that you rightly pointed out, reform isn't just one person. I know that on paper, you do make a very good point about Nigel Farage having the control at the moment, but in defence of reform, what they would say and come back on is that at the moment, the changes that they're making, the constitutional changes that they're making, are apparently with the Electoral Commission. I don't know why they're involved, but that's apparently the statement that they've made.
You have to put it. The constitution of a political party has to go through the Electoral Commission.
Fine.
But why?
You would argue that that's currently taking place. So we might see,
but it's not true. So
Okay,
you can argue it all you want. It's just not true.
but we may. All right. Well, you're saying it won't happen. Is yet to be seen. Is yet to be seen. Personally, I agree with your sentiment. I really hope it does happen properly, and I hope that, because the way I view this, what really bugged me about this since Elon Musk threw that hand grenade, is reforms momentum has been incredible, but it's also delicate, and we know that the mainstream media and are just going to absolutely gun for them even harder the more popular that they get. Now, I see, and probably millions of others see, reform as basically the only vehicle that we have available. We've got 4.5 years until the official kind of like next election. I know it can be called earlier, and people have rightly pointed that out, especially if the economy takes a massive downturn, which could very easily happen.
Well, there's a vote on Monday, isn't there? They're debating on Monday. So
Yeah, well, I mean, Ben Habib, who I admire massively, made a very, very good point. I mean, he was pilloried for it, but I actually agree with him. He said that if if the UK has to go cap in hand to the IMF or something like that, that could potentially lead to a no confidence vote and may potentially lead to a call for a general election. It is a bit of a reach, but it could happen.
it's unlikely with the Labour majority, but yeah.
Yeah, but they could. I mean, Keir Starmer is not liked within the Labour Party. He is really not liked. Wes Streeting's already on manoeuvres. Who's to say, that they might not? But you're right. I mean, logic does state that they would have to seriously shoot themselves in the foot for that to happen, and that is quite unlikely. So let's assume, we've got 4.5 years till the next election. Do we want another Conservative government that is, in my view, set up to lie to us again and fail? Do we want another Labour government? Because you can't, in my view, get a fag paper between the Conservatives and the Labour Party as it carries out. Or do we try something different, something new? And as you rightly pointed out, Reform has got some great people. They're a small party, but I mean, look at the impact that Rupert Lowe has had. Lee Anderson, I also admire. They have got some good people who I think, should the worst happen and should
No,
thrive.
well, sorry to interrupt, but Lee Anderson is a donkey. At the end of the day, he was a Labour Party member. He's a donkey.
I respect him for speaking his mind.
I do too, but he's a donkey. He'll do what he's told. The only talent they have in that party is Rupert Lowe. Tice.
He's been fantastic.
Tice does what Isabel Oakeshott tells him to do, and that's how it is, and it's fine. I've no beef with any of it.
Do you think then Reform is
It's
just
finished.
a non-starter? So where does that leave us then?
It leaves us with what we need, which is a 5-star movement, which is a Maloney-type movement, which is an anti-racist movement, an anti-climate catastrophe movement, a strong patriotic, non-nationalist but patriotic movement, which on some level Tommy Robinson has a say in and needs to endorse. And I know UKIP are on manoeuvres and all that sort of stuff as well, and saying we're the alternative, but actually it's not a political problem. And as soon as people get their heads around that, then it becomes much easier to know what to do. So the number of people I've talked out of starting political parties and all that sort of thing, I'm like, no, just sit quietly and wait for this one to either work or not work. And I've kept a very open mind about Reform. I would meet Richard Tice when he was in charge of Reform, probably once every 2 or 3 months to sit down and say, can we help in any way? Is there anything you want to do? But he as well, like all establishment shills, are about being on the grown-ups table. And that's what they want. And at the end of the day, the people that support Tommy Robinson are the people that have nothing left to fucking lose. So, someone should be standing up for them, not demeaning them and then telling them, well, you'll vote for us anyway. I mean, that's not how you do it on 7-figure salaries.
Would that not leave us back into a position, though, where we are basically having to start from scratch again and face another 5 years of Labour?
Yeah, well, we've got 5 years of Labour anyway,
It'll be 10. It'll be 10 if we don't.
It's going to be 10 anyway, so you might as well get used to that. But the one person people are missing out in this conversation is Kemi Badenoch. She does get the cultural issue. She understands it. Now I get attacked. It's hilarious actually because I get attacked for. I'm a sort of meant to be a racist apparently, and
Aren't we all?
Yeah, it's like she's only had 5 minutes to see what she can do to her party. It's very much an uphill struggle for her. But for Reform to have stood, I knew it was vainglorious when they stood against Andrea Jenkins and others. It was like, hang on a minute. Andrea Jenkins, who's now defected to Reform, standing for Lincolnshire Mayor, she would very much have won her seat if Reform hadn't stood against her. If Reform genuinely had the best interests of the country at heart, they would have left the decent Conservatives in office so that they could then have pursued the Conservative agenda, and that Reform would have cleverly, if they cared about anything other than power, which no one does seem to in this stupid game of politics, they could have ensured that in this Parliament the decent Conservatives outnumbered the wets, and that come 2029 they could have sat down with Kemi Badenoch and Nigel could have gone, right, I want to be Home Secretary or Prime Minister, who knows? But this whole thing of like, I'm Zia Yusuf, I'm coming in, it's like, who the fuck are you, mate? Sorry, I've no idea who he is.
The only problem that I've got with what you're saying, and I get where you're coming from, but from where I'm sitting, and I know that I'm not alone in saying this, is why the hell should we vote to reward the failure of the Conservative Party? And that was a big thing for me, genuinely. I spent a long time wrestling with this very question: is the Conservatives the right vehicle to bring change in this country?
It's the only vehicle.
I can't see it. They have the brand is toxic. They have blown it. They've got, and you rightly said, they have got some very, very good people in that. I really like Robert Jenrick. Kemi Badenoch, I have, if anyone follows me on Twitter, they will know I've been a huge supporter of Kemi Badenoch. Where I think she's been a bit disappointing is she should have been on an election footing from day one. She should have come out of those blocks fighting. You don't need to put out your economic policy for the next 10 years. That's not what I'm talking about. But what she could have done is offered an immediate alternative solution to what Labour is offering. And she's offered nothing. That has been a real letdown for me. Well, you say yet, but...
Well, what's the date?
It's 5th of January.
January the 5th. Right. So all of this took place, or a lot of this has taken place over Christmas. We've got, and also, I'm not going to defend Kemi Badenoch because, I'm a conservative. I am a pragmatist, and that is that in the same way that my dad's mates, I'd like to exclude him from this grouping, but my dad's mates still watch the BBC, right? They still listen to that shit, and 20% of the population still do, and it's a voting 20% of the population that still listen to that. So you're not going to dent the Conservative vote down beyond about 20%. It's not going to happen in the next 5 years. Maybe, possibly.
Well, I think the political landscape is different now. There's a lot of.
I'm not talking about you and I and those that you and I and those that are sort of engaged. But then we've got to remind ourselves that we're a niche as well. So those that actually think about this are like a minuscule proportion of the population anyway. There are people that will go who play golf on a Saturday, who live in the suburbs of London, who will not be voting Reform. They'll be voting Conservative, or some of them will vote Reform, whatever. But what you're doing by... So actually, I'd say the onus was on Farage to say why they're different. But they're not different. They're not different in any way at all. And everyone slammed Kemi Badenoch for talking about Farage's membership numbers. And but actually, at the end of the day, I think it showed out how thin-skinned they are and how entitled they feel that they can turn around and go, well, we're the alternative, whether you like it or not. They don't talk to me. They don't talk to Tommy Robinson. They don't talk to anyone else. They don't care. They feel entitled to do what they're going to do. And they've just been found severely wanting. Because if you operate in an entitled landscape where the media class are behind you, I saw Julia Hartley-Brewer suddenly jumping up today to take a pop at Elon Musk. It's like, really sorry, darling, but the whole media landscape has completely changed forever.
Yeah,
like, not just temporarily, forever.
I agree with that. And one of the things I think that kind of the old school commentators aren't picking up on is they still think like the old two-party system. And polling is showing that is just not the case anymore. People are much more likely or willing to be a floating voter, to change their vote. And that is something that I don't think they're taking into account. And, the way I see, certainly with the trajectory that Reform's been going on, and it has been nothing short of remarkable. Whether you like,
but again, has it?
Yeah.
Well, no, I would disagree with you. I would say that Reform have done amazingly well since Nigel Farage came back, because everyone loves Nigel, because they love Nigel, because he's amazing, brave, amazing sense of timing, charismatic. You go out there, you'd want him next to you in a fight, Nigel. He's one of them. He's great. But I would say most of the hyperbole around Reform is online generated. I don't think it's any of it's particularly real. I think that you look at the Conservatives, they're stuck at 22%. That's not going to change anytime soon. It might change after the next Parliament, but it's not. This whole idea of like we're going to take office in 2029, it's like, no, you're not. It's not going to happen. Best case scenario is you're going to do a deal with the Tories. The best case scenario.
Oh, well, that I do agree with you on. But there was a whole bunch of people, and I might even include myself in this, that will just never vote Conservative again. They won't do it. And seeing that, again, Reform provides them that place to go. The other things that I don't think commentators have taken into account is the ability for Reform to get people to vote who have never voted before. And that is something that I think we're starting to see happen. Could they be the largest party? I think there is a chance that could actually happen. And we might see. Well, look, all I'm saying is that
they can't because the people that are politically disengaged, who I've met in my multitude of extremely failed by-election runs. Those people hate politics. They loathe it. They absolutely can't bear it. Yeah. And what they want is, if they're going to go out and vote for something like Brexit, they would vote for that. Is they want something which is genuine and real, and they're sick of being worried about what they can say down the pub or at work, or whether they're going to get reported to someone. And they care about free speech, and they care about the denigration of their culture. They care about that because we have in our country this sort of wonderful idea, which is like we pass on a better country to our children than the one we inherited, and actually for the last 2 generations we passed on a worse one.
Agreed.
So I don't agree with you that people will never vote Conservative again, but I would say I would agree with you if I didn't think that there wasn't a possibility that the Conservatives would finally work out what the problem is, because Reform is showing them, it's obvious. Reform is saying to them, look, we just nicked half your voters, like that. So it would take an idiot Conservative leader to go. I mean, perhaps Kemi Badenoch is going to turn around and go, you know what, I want to appeal to the Lib Dem type voters. And perhaps everyone is very overly sensitive nowadays, so we just need to appeal to that. But we don't know, is the question. What we do know is that there is an alternative coming. And that alternative is going to be very powerful. And what that alternative has to base itself on is anti-cancel culture, pro-free speech, pro-Britain, and anti the Islamification of Britain. And that's the difficult bit that Farage won't go to, because he's shrewd. He knows that this country currently has, according to ONS statistics, about 7.5% of this population is Muslim. I'd say it's much more than that, but that's what the figures are. So he has to appeal to the conservative part of the Muslim vote. But what you've also noticed in the past few weeks, where there's been, well, the past few months, where there's been horrendous crimes committed in the name of Islam, is that people are sick to death of having other cultures imposed upon their culture, which fought hard over a period of over 1,000 years, so that's generations of families, to make sure that Britain maintained itself as a progressive liberal democracy. And what Islam is doing to this country, and the crimes that have been done in the avoidance of facing down what Islam has done to this country, is a major issue. And people want to be able to criticise that. And they want to be able to say, I don't like the fact that Keir Starmer hid Axel Rueda-Cabana's, the evidence gathered from Axel Rueda-Cabana's house. I don't like the fact this is going to be a big cover-up. I don't like the fact that Farage just completely stops talking about deportations. They don't like that. They want to go, I want to speak freely, I want to speak openly, I don't want to be cancelled from my job, and I don't want to turn into a Muslim state. That it's really simple. And unless a political party comes up and does that, or groups of independents, as the
Islam has been pretty good on this, and I don't think that sentiment is completely alien to reform. I think that you're right. I agree with you that Nigel Farage has been a little bit soft on that, and I also think that he, as I said already, that he really could have handled this Tommy Robinson issue far better, and none of us would be even having this conversation, which is why I find it so frustrating. But going back to this grenade that Elon Musk threw at Nigel Farage, it was being talked about that Elon Musk was going to donate large sums of money to reform. Do you think that this tiny little spat is going to have an impact on that?
I don't think it's a tiny little spat. I don't think the world's smartest guy, which is what he is.
Yeah, I agree. Huge respect for Musk.
Says things that he's not going to do. Like I think he means it. I think it's like...
What, you think he means that he wants Nigel Farage gone? So you think that he might say, well, you're not going to get any money from me until Farage...
Well, again, I would say it was online hype. Like, was there any statement from Musk saying that I'm going to give 100 million quid? Who put the stories in the paper saying that he was going to get 100 million quid? It wasn't Musk.
Farage spoke to him at Mar-a-Lago when he was last there, and according to Farage, whether it's true or not, but according to him,
According to Farage,
he's definitely open to the idea of donating money to reform.
So let's say he gives 100 million quid to reform. Yeah?
It wouldn't be that much. 10, 15 maybe.
Well, that makes no difference. You can't do anything with 10 million quid in British politics, trust me. The issue would be that you still can't... The stupidity of the whole thing, which I've been saying for a long time now, is that you can't get rid of Farage. Not that you want to. Perhaps if you put it a vote to the membership, which I'm sure he would win hands down, but you can't vote for the Constitution of the Reform Party because the Constitution of the Reform Party doesn't exist. Yet. So in the same way, it's not a political party. And until people start getting their heads around that it's a Nigel Farage oligopoly, then there's no point. It's so difficult to sort of talk about it because Farage said to me before I was sacked from GB, I said, you're really needed. I'm of your view. You're really needed. And he says, I've got one more hand to play. And this is the hand he's played. And it's been a bad one. A really bad one, in my view.
Where I
And
agree...
Rupert Lowe is speaking at odds with the leader of his own party.
Yes.
So Farage is saying, no, we can't deport anyone, while trying to curry the working class conservative Muslim vote in this country.
He didn't say that. What he said word for word was, and again, I didn't agree with it, but what he said was the logistics of mass deporting people would be next to impossible. Again, I don't agree with that. And secondly, that he said that it would look bad. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the headlines and stuff? Well, this is one thing I do. Again, I don't completely agree with him, but where I'm trying to understand where he's coming from is he's trying to tread a really shit tightrope between keeping his support and trying to not alienate himself maybe from the wider electorate. Now, even I'm not sure what I've just said is factually accurate, because the reason for that is I find it difficult to tell what the impact would be if Farage had been more pragmatic about Tommy Robinson, whether the mainstream media would have gone for him or not. My gut tells me that if he'd have been more pragmatic about Tommy, that the media would be right now running headlines, far right this, far right that.
They're going to call you far right anyway.
See what he's trying to do. He is trying to balance, in the same way. I don't want to get into a massive another subject, but in the same way where I completely agree with you, we all hate Ofcom, but GB News, I think, is trying to be on the playing field, and to be on that playing field, you have to be a part of Ofcom. Just in the same way as Nigel's trying to be on that playing field, to not hit that kind of glass ceiling of support, while at the same time being acceptable to the media, which, by the way, we all know is dying. But until they are dead and irrelevant, you kind of have to play with the enemy a little bit. And I think that possibly is what Farage is badly, I completely admit, has badly done. So let me pose this question to you very quickly then. If Nigel Farage all of a sudden took an about turn and pragmatically spoke about Tommy Robinson, do you think that he could recover this? Do you think that he could pull this back?
They say in showbiz, one of the first things you get told is you only get one chance to make a first impression, and you only get one entrance onto the stage. I think that he's going to struggle because, again, by the sheer difficulty of it, Tommy's not asked to be part of reform. So he's not even asking for anything.
To be fair to Farage, he hasn't wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, well, to be fair to Farage,
that have come to him, from mainstream media who are clearly using this.
No, you don't. I'm sorry. You can't. Richard Tice is referred to the people that support Tommy Robinson as that lot. Yeah. And you know what comes to my head when they say that lot? David Cameron calling Conservative Party members swivel-eyed loons.
Yes.
That's what comes to my head. And I go, I'm not a swivel-eyed loon. The opportunity here is radical. You have to be radical. And I've been saying this to Kemi a lot, which is that if, the Farage's tanks are everywhere, except on culture. He's not good on culture, so attack him on culture. Find a place where you are good too, which is on she hates DEI, she hates the diversity agenda. And actually that's a much more important issue in this country than Farage. To me, he just seems about 5 to 10 years behind. Everything the Reform Party is saying, I said on Question Time 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Everything Rupert Lowe says, I have said 5 years ago. I've said all of it. And I'm not bigging myself up. I'm just pointing out and saying, I understand what the problem is. And unless you understand what the problem is, you can't come out with a solution to the problem. So it's not about pragmatism with Tommy Robinson, because Tommy Robinson doesn't give a shit. The guy's in jail, he's a political prisoner, and no one has his back. No one.
that. I agree
And
with that.
Farage should have his fucking back, and so should Reform. And they shouldn't be sitting there appeasing Muslims to try and appear like they're grown-ups sat on it. Sorry, I'm getting annoyed. But to sit there on the grown-ups table. It's like, sorry, Nigel, if you want to sit on the green seat that much, you don't belong to be there.
What if, I know I'm trying to push you on this, but what if Rupert Lowe took the spot, took the leader's spot, and addressed things in the way that you and I both agree with in some respects on how to talk about Tommy Robinson. It made my skin crawl a little bit too when Richard Sykes said that lot, because like you,
It's not the first time he said it either.
No,
There's
it
a
is.
very, very patronising attitude
Yeah.
to the electorate. The
I
way he
agree.
speaks to them, he goes, "Oh, do grow up." Like he'll respond to tweets, and it's like, "Hang on a minute, mate. When I was a kid, right? I come from a posh family, all right. When I left school, I got nothing from my father except his name. Nothing. I didn't get a penny. I was sent off to work and to make my way in the world, as were every single one of my siblings. It was the same way. Tice doesn't have the right, having inherited a fortune, to sit there and tell people how to grow up who work really hard in this world. And absolutely, if Rupert Lowe could, at least people could be given the option to put Rupert Lowe in charge and whatever, great, but they can't, because there is no constitutional method within the Reform Party for that to take place, because it's not the Reform Party, it's the Nigel Farage Party.
I really wish as well, because it was a bit of a revelation for me as well. I was always open-minded about Tommy Robinson. I refused to accept narratives that are presented to me from the BBC and mainstream media, because I know that it'll all be complete bollocks, basically. You've got to find this stuff out for yourself. And probably like a lot of people, I've done a lot of research on Tommy Robinson, and I think he's been incredibly unfairly treated by our judicial system. That's not saying that I agree with everything, but you see how easy that is to be pragmatic about it. Just be honest about your views. But what really did get me, this is where I think I completely agree with you, is the revelation for me was going to that United the Kingdom rally to see for myself, the real people that are supportive of Tommy Robinson, and not just him personally. And this is actually a vibe that I got from the whole place. It wasn't just about him. It felt like a real movement. And the people that were there listening to your speech, which I did, and I think who else was there? Carl, what's his face? Benjamin was there. There were some really great speeches. And I wish Richard Tice and Farage could have gone along to that event, and they would have been able to see the things that I saw, just normal.
I invited them both. I invited them
Well,
both.
they were stupid. I kind of understand why they're like, oh, if we go to that we're just going to get crucified by the press. But I think that would have done them a huge. They could have gone to that event, and I think they would have. I think they would have gone through the kind of change I did through. I mean, that it was instrumental into changing my views about, because even though I was open-minded about Tommy Robinson, there was still a bit of me that wondered about all the support and stuff like that. But going to it, physically going to, and then seeing the newspaper headlines the same day in some cases that were coming out about that United the Kingdom rally. I mean, it was disgusting, the things they were saying about the people that were there. And yet my own experience, and this is why I'm so annoyed that Tice said what he said about that lot. Well, that lot actually are just normal salt of the earth voters who are very likely to vote Reform. And I think they made an error. I think Nigel Farage made an error by being so
Cancel culture-y. Cancelling Tommy.
It's like, make a really good point about that.
As you quite rightly pointed out, those people, the reason why the vibe at those marches is so good is because it's not about Tommy Robinson. He's just the figurehead that the reason that they go, he's been treated really unfairly and I'm behind him. The British working class are the engine room of this country. They have every great thing that's happened in this country has been the result of the British working class. And they have suffered more than anybody else, any other socio-economic group in this country. And they are being ignored.
And labelled as far right.
Yeah, well, this is the thing.
Which is wrong.
Who cares? I mean, I'm a racist, apparently, as I said, It's like, honestly, I don't care What I care about is the political alternative is not about Tommy Robinson. He's not the political alternative. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's not about Nigel Farage. It's about them. It's about the people that are shut on from a great height year on year on year on year on year. It's not Islington. It's not Armando Iannucci's community, which is getting bombarded with people that can't speak English. You think it's okay to walk up to a girls' school and try and shout at 13-year-olds, and as we've seen in cases in all over the country, rape and abuse them in the most based and satanic ways. It's not their communities that are getting screwed over, it's the British working class, who will be, under Keir Starmer, asked to go and fight in Ukraine at this rate. And it's like, I'm sorry, I only give a shit about them. Yeah, because they make our world. Our world is delivered by them. Our world is built by them. Our roads are paved by them. Our children are made better in hospital by them. Our streets are policed by them. And the way that Farage has treated these people and the way that tries to treat these people is fucking despicable. And I'm sorry, there is no way back. They're a fraud. The whole thing is a big giant political Ponzi scheme, and it's a fraud to get rich. What do you get for your fucking £10 a month? What are you actually getting?
I agree with you. I honestly do with what you're saying there, because that's what bugged me about it the most. Was people have been called for far too long, just instantly labelled as far right, for showing any kind of views which I suppose the mainstream media would find toxic. And when Tice and Farage kind of wrote off all of Tommy Robinson's supporters like that, my instant reaction was to kind of what's the word I'm thinking of? It instantly sent the hairs up on the back of my neck. I didn't like it. So I think you've already answered this question. Is what is the future going to look like without reform, if that's the way you see it happening? And what vehicle, you partially sort of answered this, but maybe it's too, I suppose what I'm trying to get at is it sounds like you're willing to wait, or potentially go through another Labour term. And this isn't a criticism, or it's more just an observation, because I hear where you're coming from. The opposite side of that is I've got this whole thing inside me at the moment, bubbling away, saying, but we are so close. We've made so much progress against the Union Party through reform, through great people like Ben Habib's been sidelined, but he was very much instrumental, as you know, in the start of that party, and people like Rupert Lowe. Do you think that we are going to have another Labour government to go through this? Do you think do you honestly believe the Conservatives can win the next election outright? And do you think there's any, because I don't think there is an issue with reform doing a deal with the Conservatives. What I've always said, and we'll kind of try and finish on this a little bit. My view is that for this country to change for the better, and by God it needs to, is we need to have a strong, united right wing. And I've always said I don't really care whether that is called reform or it's the Conservatives. But one thing I do know is that the current Conservative Party, or certainly the one that ran up to the last election, is toxic. They have lied to too many people, but they still have some very decent MPs left. The likes of Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch. There are some MPs that I would consider a reform light. And what I kind of hope for is that if no party has an overall majority, that there will be a deal done. Can you see that scenario playing out?
Well, one thing is for certain, unless something happens between the Conservatives and Reform or whatever the other vehicle is, we are going to have another Labour government. Because, and when I started our party, which, I'm an actor, so it's quite difficult to be a politician and an actor. I'm not really honed up for it, but I did commission a big bit of work about it's called Modern British Values, and I could either pay 80 grand and publish it, or 30 grand and not publish it, but I get the same information. And I thought, well, I don't need to publish it, so I just want to know what people think. And there is a very large in exactly the same way as in Islam, actually, weirdly. Leftism and Islam are very similar in lots of ways. There's a very, very sizable minority of people in this country who are extremely what people would call hard left, but I would just call, life haters. And those people are always going to vote Labour. Then you've got a portion of people in the middle who can be swayed, and then you've got people who you would describe on the right, leading all the way out to ethno-nationalists, who I don't agree with. And I fit somewhere in the middle, possibly in a sort of Tom Stoppard classical liberal type area is where I would fit in that place. And my emphasis is on art. It's not on politics. I hate politics and culture. Politics waste time. So one thing is for sure, if Kemi Badenoch doesn't come out in January and say something quite serious about curtailing the powers of the police, getting rid of the College of Policing, getting rid of unelected bureaucrats who are writing laws and guidance for what children can be taught in schools, if she doesn't come out on the stuff that she's very strong on, then the Conservatives are screwed.
Just very quickly on that, very quickly on that, what do you think, and I think you know the answer to this, Kemi Badenoch would have said about Tommy Robinson? Because wouldn't she have said exactly the same thing, if not actually worse, than Nigel Farage?
I don't know.
If Kemi Badenoch, let's be honest, if Kemi Badenoch was asked whether she supported Tommy Robinson or not, she is almost certainly going to take the same line that Farage did, if not a more strict line. I think Jenrick has said the same. In fact, I think Jenrick, and I think he's great. I think he's gone through a bit of a conversion, but I think he's great. He disowned Nigel Farage for the same reasons Nigel Farage is disowning Tommy Robinson. So yeah. I get what you're saying. Don't get me wrong. I hear you 100%. But you're saying we should give Kemi Badenoch a chance. But if you put Kemi Badenoch in that same position, which has infuriated you and me to a point with the way that Nigel Farage has responded, isn't Kemi Badenoch just going to do exactly the same thing?
But she's not the insurgent alternative. She's the Conservative Party. And I would hope, and if Kemi Badenoch, who I have admiration for, I would hope she would turn around and go, I admire the work that he's done to expose grooming gangs. And, I also support and 100% uphold his right to free speech because those are conservative values. I would hope she would handle it in that way. But of course she wouldn't. She's not going to identify. But as I was trying to say in our conversation, it's not about Tommy Robinson. It's got nothing to do with Tommy Robinson. It's about cancel culture and free speech. So if you're an insurgent and you're trying to come into politics and you're trying to change, take the mind and the soul of a country with you, then don't use the tactics that the other fuckers use. It's that simple.
I get you. I hear what you're saying. I just think that, and again, I repeat, I think Nigel Farage has not played this well. No. But I do sort of understand that he is probably worried that any kind of love-in with Tommy Robinson, which it doesn't need to be. That's why I find this whole thing so bloody frustrating for the reasons that you've said and the reasons that I've already said. It didn't need to go down like this. He didn't need to dig in like this. We wouldn't even be having this conversation if Farage had said exactly what you just said. But I think the point still stands when you're looking to compare, what could be the vehicle that defeats Labour and keeps that shit out of our government for as long as humanly possible. We need a strong, united right wing, and I just don't think writing Reform off now is going to end anywhere pleasant for anybody. I think that if we start writing Reform off now, I think we're just opening up the doors to a completely fractured right wing that almost could be irreparable. If you know what I mean. That is what worries me. All I care about. Maybe after, let's just say hypothetically, the Tories do a deal with Reform and they form the next government, and we've got like Deputy Prime Minister Nigel Farage, or Defence Secretary Rupert Lowe, or something like that. That is where I see the real fun beginning. So the things that you and I care about, the things that we're worried about the future of the right wing in terms of how it takes this country forward, we can start working on those once we've got rid of Labour. That is what's worrying me, is that we're just going to end up in another position where Labour are just going to win by default if we don't get our shit together. And I see what Elon Musk doing, however well-intentioned it might have been, as potentially damaging that one achievement of getting rid of Labour. And then after we've got, maybe I'm being too pragmatic myself,
Well, we've
but
got,
after
but
we've got rid of Labour, we can then start working on reform and the Conservatives, and then building a proper movement.
we've got Labour because of reform. So, at the end of the day,
That I will strongly disagree with you on. We've got Labour because the Conservatives just did not deserve a single vote.
I agree, but there are some Conservatives that were great.
If reform hadn't run,
I spoke to Richard Tice many times, as I told you, and Richard Tice told me that his only ambition in life was to destroy the Conservative Party.
and rightly so.
Now, no, I don't think that's rightly so. I don't think anyone should have an ambition to destroy something. I think the best ambitions you should have in life are to build something.
I get it though, because
But
I'm
he's turned around and he said, I want to destroy the Conservative Party, and he's succeeded. Well done. Now we've got 5 years of Labour, possibly
He
10.
helped, but if reform had not run in that last election, the Conservatives still would not have won that election.
There's no difference between reform and the Conservatives. They're the same thing. It's an entitled boys' club. That's all it is.
I'm not convinced on that.
Rupert Lowe being the glaring exception to that. And
Rupert Lowe represents reform, and he has.
he doesn't actually. Rupert Lowe is. Well, I'm sorry to niggle at you a bit. In the same way as the movement is not about Tommy Robinson, the movement's not about Rupert Lowe either. It's about common sense values being imparted and offered to the UK electorate so that they can vote against the Uniparty. That's what it's about. Now, Reform won't play that game. They're playing the grown-ups table game, where they're sat on the grown-ups table going, oh, yes, look, I'm all grown up. Tommy Robinson, dreadful. It's like, you're the same as the fucking Uniparty. Fuck off. I can't be asked. I don't have any time for these people. It's like you either offer me and the electorate an alternative, which is anti-cancel culture and pro-free speech, or fuck off. I want you to lose too. I do. I want them to lose. I don't like them.
I think that's a little bit harsh because
I am quite harsh.
That's why I like it. But I think it's a little bit harsh because I think Reform have positioned themselves to be that. We are only talking about this one, and it hasn't just been this one incident, but this one topic of Nigel Farage, in my view, badly reacting to the Tommy Robinson thing. Now, if you'd have taken that out, I don't actually think a lot of the things you've said stack up, in as much as that Reform have been different to the way that they have approached their politics has been. They attack the Uniparty more than anyone.
What's their immigration policy?
What their entire immigration policy?
What's the core tenet of the Reform immigration policy?
Well, they want to freeze
one in, one out.
One in, one out. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you know what that means?
Pause on immigration. They have excluded, by the way, they've made a very point of excluding where there is a need. That is a different. So if the NHS have a need for a specific, which I can't see there being, because there's so many people unemployed in this country who could do that job.
Why didn't they just turn around and go do what Orban did and promote the family, promote the Christian values that made this country good, instead of turning around and go one in, one out? What you're going to do is you're going to lose one English person, and you're going to get one immigrant. That's what the one in, one out system is. Reform are a fake Ponzi scheme. I'm sorry, I don't know how to dress it up. I know everyone's really hopeful and they want change and think Reform is it. They're not. Sorry. I've been saying that this. You're saying that's centred around this one issue. No, it's not. I've been saying it from day fucking one. You can find me on GB News saying that they're a Ponzi scheme. It's not about the people and the movement. It's about Nigel wanting to finally get some recognition that he much deserved, and I really do take my hat off to that what that man has suffered for trying to make this country a better place. So I do acknowledge that. But this was about him getting into Parliament, and this was about Richard Tice getting into Parliament, and this was about dealing the Conservatives a blow. And yes, the Conservatives need dealing a blow, but that shouldn't be your super objective. Your super objective in the acting mentality is to turn around and go, what do I want my country to look like? I don't want my kids going to school and being told that everything Britain has done is dreadful. I want root and branch reform of every single fucking institution in this country. That's what I want a political party to offer me. And Reform are offering Tory light. They are Tory light. They have nothing interesting to offer anyone. Rupert Lowe as an individual is brilliant, but he's like Jacob Rees-Mogg on abortions. It's like, Jacob Rees-Mogg has some pretty amazing views on abortions, whether you agree with them or not. But he goes, that's not the position of the party, though. That's just my view. Whereas Reform they're not anything. They're nothing. Scratch just beneath the surface, there's nothing there. I promise you. I know, because I do. I spend a lot of time doing it. But I agree with you. I want change.
Yeah, and this is where I think we are in agreement is that we cannot go on like this. We cannot go. A lot of the stuff that we are very against in this country in terms of the culture wars, and that it's happened under the Conservative watch, and it pains me to say it.
But it was philosophical.
I am at heart a traditional Conservative.
But it wasn't done for ideological reasons. So you've got to understand, this is the thing that other people miss. The Conservatives do it because we're not breeding. So we've got to import a load of people to keep our GDP up and our standard of living up. That's why they do it. Whereas Labour do it because they hate our country. And it's different. So the alternative has to be that someone comes in and goes, I want my country back. Not, there's no way we can deal with foreign criminals or dual nationals that rape young children and brand them, that Tommy Robinson has been exposing forever, to turn around and cancel that one person. I'm just like, you are a shame on you for as an opposition to anything. And this whole sort of spaffing all over themselves about how wonderful they are, we're going to win the general election. No, you're not. You're not going to win the general election because people are, and the other thing I learned from acting is people can tell when you're lying. Never underestimate your audience. Your audience are much smarter than you think they are, and the electorate are much smarter than they think they are. And I think the electorate, Reform will carry on. They'll do that, and then slowly they'll just do that, and the Conservatives will try and be a bit more conservative, and there'll be this sort of mulchy crap on the right wing, and nothing good will happen, and Labour will get another turn. So either Reform go away, which they may or may not, or Rupert Lowe takes over and they may get some principles again, and we might be all right. But this idea that it's like it's this hanging on to a sinking ship thing. It's like, well, maybe that's the answer. It's like, no, it's not. Be bold. Think outside the box. You can change. This change comes from people. It could also come from cryptocurrency. It could come from somebody saying, I'm going to keep 10 or 15% of my income out of the government's pocket. No one knows. No one knows what's going to happen. But I'll tell you one thing. Reform are a political Ponzi scheme, and they've proved themselves to be that over the way they dealt with Tommy Robinson. They've proved themselves over the way they dealt with the United Kingdom, and they proved the way that they disparage and dishonour the very people that want to vote for them because they believe in change, and shame on them.
Well, on that bombshell, maybe we should agree to disagree a little bit. But no, honestly, I do agree with you. I think, and this was the point of our, the entire debate to start with, was, I think, to summarise, I think Nigel Farage played this badly. I think he's possibly damaged a little bit of his support by this. I think the whole thing is unnecessary. I don't think it needed to happen. But we are where we are. We might disagree on what vehicle it is that we need to defeat this uniparty, but I think we're both in agreement of where we want to get to. That I do sense that we are on the same. We both want to get to the same place. I suppose I'm just desperate to make sure that it's almost I see Reform as like this kind of China doll. Which what was the saying? Basically what Labour are doing on the run up to the election, they're just holding this thing, keeping quiet, trying not to break it, just so they can get over the line, and then they can change and develop as a party, whatever. And that's a little bit how I see potentially what Reform could be. and it might not happen.
Yeah,
But reform,
you're exactly right. They're doing exactly the same thing, which
Yeah.
is Labour under Keir Starmer pretended to be very moderate. You know, it's the safe pair of hands thing. It's like, I'm Keir Starmer, I'm a safe pair of hands, but it's an act and it's bullshit. And he's a socialist, and we all know it. And Reform are like, we're the insurgency, but you're not. It's bullshit. You're the same old thing in a different rosette. It's kind of they're just another part of the uni party establishment, and anyone who's trying to stop the people having a say, I've got no time for. We're on. You know what? The one thing that is true, and we can be really hopeful about, is change is coming 100%. We are going to see across Europe, we're already seeing it across Europe, but we're going to see in the United Kingdom, we're going to see the rise, and I don't know where it's going to come from. I really don't. You're going to see the rise of a very patriotic, very, very, Britain-centred party, and it's not going to be fake this time.
No, that I do agree. I feel it in the air. I mean, you can see a change happening across Europe. You can see, obviously, with Trump getting back in, we've seen what's happening in Argentina. I mean, I really do sense that we are a political earthquake is coming. What that political earthquake looks like, I'm not quite sure.
Common sense. Nature abhors a vacuum.
So.
It's really simple. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. It's just, I'm very happy to have been vocal in my criticism of Reform, which I have been from day one. And I'm very happy to continue being critical because I'm doing it based on facts and knowledge and reality. I'm not doing it on emotion. I'm not doing it because, that old adage that you shouldn't let some people on a ship because they'll sink it if you don't allow them to be the captain. I've got no desire to be in charge of anything. What I do want to see is a movement which is genuinely inclusive. I want to take all those words back. Inclusive of people. Yeah. I don't want to see some old boys club of people going, that lot, civilized loons. Ugh, ugh. I've got about as much time for them as I do for lazy shit on a Sunday morning.
Well, I think we should. That's a brilliant way to end this because I'm sure you're probably getting hungry now.
I am. I need a steak. You can see I'm getting hungry. I've got a steak I've got steak on the way.
Well, I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. Genuinely appreciate that. And I think we both put our points across well. I think. Definitely.
I think that we're, you're embodying. I've got a lot of people who I know who are in your camp and who think that I'm a sort of stupid civilized loon, and I'm like, well, good, let's talk about it.
I do not think that one bit.
So it's good. It's good to talk. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's good to talk.
That is exactly right.
That's the most important thing. And free speech. Without 100%. free speech is the most powerful tool that mankind has.
I could not agree more. But again, thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate it, Laurence.
My pleasure, brother.